Hello Scorpio, my name is Keith Haswell and I'm a professional astrologer with 40 years experience in the business now and over 30,000 clients worldwide, tens of thousands of students worldwide watching my YouTube videos, of which there's 145 of them up there. It's my pleasure to welcome you, Scorpio, to this particular video on your cycles for January and February 2015. First of all, just a few things about yourself, Scorpio. You're a very deep person, very deep, introspective. You spend a lot of time thinking and reflecting upon aspects of your nature that you're trying to get rid of and that you're trying to transform and change. You are the epitome of change, because the 8th house is the house of change. It's the house of death, and many times we don't change until after we've died. But we change and bring about changes within ourselves, Scorpio, through the 8th house of introspection and reflection. And through that introspection and reflection, aspects of our nature that we've become enamored with, negative aspects of our nature, die. And you are the 8th sign, so that has a natural affiliation with the 8th house of the horoscope. So you are the epitome of change. You're very goal-oriented when it comes to money. You really need to have an arrow there pointing towards where you're heading as far as your financial goals are concerned. That's very, very important to you, to really have a target that you're aiming at to do with your sense of security. And your sense of security also comes through expansion. Expansion through travel, and also expansion through an intake of knowledge. And that knowledge is about philosophy and higher learning and so forth. Now, you don't really engage in idle chatter. You keep a lot of things to yourself. You're very well controlled as far as speech is concerned. There's some unhappiness in your childhood, Scorpio, to do with a relative, perhaps the early death of a relative. Could be an aunt or an uncle, could be a brother or a sister, but there's the early death of a relative that you're very fond of and very close to, and that has an impact upon you. There's quite often delays with regard to getting from A to B. You don't schedule your time as wisely as what you would like to, so quite often you're running late for appointments. Now, you live in a de facto relationship at some time in your life, and you live in unusual circumstances around the home too. You could live with another family, or you could have other people living with you who cohabitate with you in the home, and there's a terrific leaning toward the deeper side of life and New Age philosophy, especially in the later part of your life. Now, there seems to be a lot of secret worries in your life about children, Scorpio. So your children can have problems if you've got children in your life, and you must bear in mind that this is a lifetime analysis that I'm looking at here. So if you're 18, of course, children won't mean anything to you at this stage. And if you're 65 and your children are off your hands and living their own lives, well then it's not going to mean so much to you. But it's a lifetime situation, so you've got to look for similarities as well. Now, there's worries about children. Worries about children and secret worries somehow connected with drugs and alcohol to do with children. Drug abuse there perhaps among your children. And there can be a lot of insecurities for you in the area of relationships, because you are naturally attracted towards secret relationships, Scorpio. So there will be secret relationships in your life. Now, you seem to have a uniform in a job at some time in your life, or you wear a dust coat or overalls. There can be a lot of stress and tension in your life focusing through health matters. And there can be a lot of disagreements from time to time with co-workers as well, because some of them will be rather dominant in their nature. You marry a person or have a de facto relationship with a person who's very attractive, whether male or female, a very attractive spouse, and very loving but very possessive and jealous in their nature from time to time as well. So that'll just give you a little bit of a rundown on your personality. Now what I'm going to do for you, Scorpio, is I'm going to look at the movements of the faster moving bodies, the Sun, Mercury, Venus and Mars, And as they move through the signs of the zodiac, they also move through the houses of your horoscope, Scorpio. So I'll tell you the type of events that are being brought about through the movement of these bodies through the houses of your horoscope for January and February 2015. And what I'll do for you, Scorpio, is I'll put it on a timeline, so that I'll tell you where these bodies are on the 1st of January, and then when any of them changes into a different sign and therefore into a different house of yours, and therefore brings about different circumstances and conditions and events, I'll tell you when that happens, so it's on a timeline. Now on the 1st of January, Scorpio, the Sun, Mercury and Venus are all in the 3rd house of your horoscope. Now, that means that there's a lot of social activities with relatives and with neighbours. There's a great deal of love and affection there among relatives and neighbours, those who are close to you. You really love music during this particular period, and there's a lot more communication with those that are close to you as well. Mars starts off the year in the 4th house of your horoscope, so there can be a fair bit of stress and tension around the home and to do with the family side of life. There can be conflicts with parents with Mars in the 4th house of your horoscope, and there's potential for accidents around the home when Mars is in the 4th house of your horoscope. Now the first change that we come to, Scorpio, happens on the 4th of January when Venus moves into the 4th house of your horoscope. And when Venus is in the 4th house of your horoscope, there's a lot more social activities around the home and connected with the family. There's a great deal of love for parents, should they play a prominent part in your life. And there's a lot of interest in music and things like that around the home as well. Mercury moves into the 4th house of your horoscope on the 5th of January, Scorpio. And with Mercury there's a lot more communication among family members. And there seems to be a lot more communication around the home, whoever's living with you. The 13th of January sees Mars moves into the 5th house of your horoscope. Now, when Mars is in the 5th house of your horoscope for 2 or 3 weeks, Scorpio, there can be a lot of stress and tension focusing through romance and love, and you can be rather impulsive in jumping into a hasty relationship. So just be careful. There'll be an increase in your sex drive, whether you're male or female, with Mars in the 5th house. And you can, if you're in the market for a relationship, you can jump into a relationship based on physical attraction and impulse, and you can get your fingers burnt. So just be careful there. On the 21st of January, there's the Sun moves into the 4th house of your horoscope and remains there for 30 days, Scorpio. With the Sun in the 4th house of your horoscope, the whole of your personality is focused upon family and domestic matters. On the 22nd of January, Scorpio, Mercury goes into a retrograde motion. It's still in the 4th house of your horoscope, but it goes into a retrograde motion, which means that it's in an apparent backward motion in relation to the background space between Earth and Mercury. Now, when Mercury is retrograde, it impacts negatively upon the house that it sits in and also the house that Mercury rules. Now, it's sitting in the 4th house of your horoscope, so there's miscommunications with family members when Mercury is retrograde, and it also impacts upon the 8th house of your horoscope and the 11th house of your horoscope. The 8th house is the house of joint finances, so there'll be miscommunications to do with joint finances, and also the 11th house is to do with friends, so there'll be miscommunications with friends. So in other words, you say things to friends that you really don't mean, and it hurts them, and they can say things to you as well. So just be careful with your speech when Mercury is retrograde. It only remains retrograde until the 12th of February, okay? Now on the 28th of January, Scorpio, Venus moves into the 5th house of your horoscope, and if you're female, that's going to see a noticeable increase in your sex drive, but there's a great deal of opportunity for new romantic attachments with Venus in the 5th house. So over the next 2 or 3 weeks is a good time to form a new relationship. You'll certainly want to be getting out and about and having a lot more activity on the social side of your life. Your children, if they play a prominent part in your life, will be much more affectionate and loving, and there's a lot more social involvements revolving around their activities as well. Now then, on the 19th of February, Scorpio, the Sun moves into the 5th house of your horoscope and remains there for 30 days. With the Sun in the 5th house of your horoscope, your whole personality focuses upon the children, romance, love, and the social side of life generally. So you'll be the centre of attention in parties and social functions. You'll be an organiser when it comes to the social side of life. On the 21st of February, Venus moves into the 6th house of your horoscope, and it remains there for 2 or 3 weeks. With Venus in the 6th house of your horoscope, Scorpio, it's a very good time to go for job interviews if you're in the market for a new job. There's a lot more social involvements with people that you work with, and it's a good cycle for you to do with friendships and things that can spring from the job. The last one we come to is on the 21st of February, Scorpio, and that's Mars moves into the 6th house of your horoscope. Now, when Mars is in the 6th house of your horoscope, there can be accidents involving domestic pets. So you could be bitten by a dog or scratched by a cat, for example. There's potential for conflicts with people that you work with because they'll be a lot more dominant and assertive in their nature, and you will react to that and perhaps cause an argument, so just be careful there. It's not a time for making changes in your job when Mars is in the 6th house of your horoscope, so that's going to put a little bit of a damper there with the Venus there as well. But anyway, just be careful not to act on impulse in regard to changes in your job, okay? Now, I want to look at Jupiter for you, Scorpio, to tell you what's going on with Jupiter, because Jupiter takes 12 months to go through a particular sign and therefore to go through a particular house of your horoscope. At the beginning of the year, Jupiter is around 23 degrees Leo. Now, that means that it's been in that particular sign for the last 9 months, so you've already felt the impact of Jupiter being in the 10th house of your horoscope. So a parent has perhaps travelled overseas, or you've travelled with a parent overseas, or a parent has travelled to visit you, or you've travelled to visit a parent sometime there in this last 9 months. And there's also been a lot of activity there to do with a career and business. There's been expansion in career, expansion in your business, and there's been good stars generally through parents and dealings with government departments with Jupiter in the 10th house of your horoscope. But Jupiter goes retrograde on the 1st of January, and so that means, and it stays retrograde for the 2 months of January and February. Now, when Jupiter is retrograde, it impacts negatively upon the house that it's sitting in, and that's the 10th house of your horoscope. And so you've got to be careful of your judgment, because your judgment can be in error if you're expanding in business or making a change in your career. It also impacts negatively upon the houses that Jupiter rules, which are Sagittarius and Pisces, and that's the 2nd house in your case, to do with finances. So be careful of your judgment in regard to decisions about spending money and investing money and things like that. And also the 5th house of your horoscope, there can be bad judgment for you in terms of romance, love, and the social activities. You can get into a secret relationship based on bad judgment, and there can be secret worries about children when Jupiter is retrograde, impacting upon your 5th house, okay? Now, Saturn, Scorpio, is sitting in your 2nd house and has been there for only a few days. It's just changed into the 2nd house, which means that it's been in the 1st house of your horoscope, Scorpio, for the last 2.5 years. So you've felt the impact of Saturn in the 1st house of your horoscope during the last 2 years. You've had problems with your health. You've had frustrations in things that you wanted to get started and commenced and get going, projects that come from your own origin, and there's been a lot of frustrations there for you. You've had to learn the hard way, Scorpio, in the last 2.5 years about health and looking after your health and right diet and exercise and things like that, and you've had to learn the hard way with regard to planning things out carefully before you launch them, okay? Now, all of us are called upon, Scorpio, to make change inside of ourselves. The only thing that's constant in the universe, Scorpio, is change. And all of us are called upon to make changes inside of ourselves, and most times, Scorpio, that change comes through along the avenue of necessity. In other words, we need to make changes inside of ourselves to maintain our financial viability. We need to make changes inside of ourselves to keep the family unit together. We need to make changes inside of ourselves to hold on to that relationship. We need to make changes inside of ourselves to hold on to that job. We need to make changes inside of ourselves to improve our health. So this is along the avenue of necessity. Now, change also comes through the avenue of fear and pain. Now, you're never going to get rid of fear, Scorpio, okay? Because fear is the opposite polarity of love. There's only two major emotions in the universe, Scorpio, and that is love and fear. Hate is not the opposite polarity of love. Hate is a derivative of fear. And you're never going to be able to get rid of fear because fear is vital for your survival. Fear of heights, fear of falling, fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of isolation, fear of loneliness, fear of ridicule, and so forth. So these are the things that bring about changes within ourselves, Scorpio. But we also bring about changes along the avenue of pain. Now, mainly emotional pain, okay? We tend to discount emotional pain. We think if we stub our toe or something like that, oh, that's pain, I've got to think about that. Or if we end up in hospital with a problem with our knee or a problem here or a problem there and we're in a lot of pain for a period of time, we tend to think that that's pain. But the most important and powerful pain is emotional pain, Scorpio. And so all of us are charged with the task of making changes inside of ourselves, and unfortunately we choose so many times the avenue of pain. Okay? Now it's much more elegant, Scorpio, to choose the avenue in order to make changes inside of ourselves, to choose the avenue of gratitude. Gratitude for what, you might ask? Gratitude for God, to God and Goddess, for the gifts that they have bestowed upon us. They've given us the gift, Scorpio, of eternal life. We can never ever die. All of us have lived heaps of lifetimes to get where we are today. You didn't just pop in as a fully fledged human being with all of your attributes and all of your intelligence. No, you have lived heaps of lifetimes in the past, each life becoming more of who you really are, and each life reaching and stretching and changing. So God and Goddess have given us the gift of eternal life, and even after we finish here in this dimension of reality, we keep on working towards our growth and development, Scorpio, in the human level until we reach a level of relative perfection. And then we can move on into higher dimensions of consciousness beyond the human level altogether. Well, what's that like, you ask yourself? Well, we don't know. You can ask a dog, what does it know about the human level of consciousness? It doesn't know anything about the human level of consciousness, really, except that you're the source of its food. So we don't know what's going on there in these higher dimensions because we're not high enough in consciousness to relate to that. So we don't have to worry about that, but we have to worry about improving ourselves and realising that, hey, would you like to go back to being a dog or a cat? No, you like to have the human state of consciousness. So they've given us the gift of eternal life, and they've also given us the gift, Scorpio, of being able to consciously create the events and conditions of our life through conscious choice. Now, most of us, Scorpio, don't want that responsibility, and so we give that power away to our subconscious mind. Now, all of us have the same raw material, Scorpio, and they are our attitudes and beliefs, our thoughts and our feelings. And those attitudes and beliefs and thoughts and feelings sponsor decisions and choices. And those attitudes, beliefs, thoughts and feelings are the raw materials that are creating all of the events of your life. Make no mistake about it, events and conditions in your life, Scorpio, don't happen by random chance. There's no such thing as random chance in the universe. Everything happens according to cosmic law. But if your raw materials, which are the things that are creating all of the events of your life, Scorpio, if those raw materials are negative, such as worry, fear, anxiety, doubt, insecurity, low self-esteem, problems with our self-image, martyrhood, shame, guilt, and so forth, what can we expect, Scorpio, in terms of the events and conditions of our life? So our task is to spruce up those raw materials and to transform them into qualities, principles, and values of integrity, trust, devotion, idealism, hope, joy, wonder, awe, reliability, and so forth, leadership qualities and so forth. So this is what our task is at this point in our life and in this level of consciousness, Scorpio, is to transform our consciousness. And we do that through transforming and changing our raw materials into the positive equivalent. And that's what our higher self is out there to do. Our higher self is out there to help us to grow and reach and stretch and become more of who we really are. Now, in line with that, Scorpio, I've got available from my website 12 CDs out of my first book, What Really Matters. It's a book on about astrology, meditation and reincarnation. And 12 CDs using my voice with beautiful backing music. I take you in and out of meditation time and time again. So you've got the opportunity to go to my website. The website address will pop up on the screen shortly, so you can write that down. And go to my website, download that first free CD, and if you think that that's a message that your higher self wants you to listen to, well, then take it on board and then download CD number 2 and see what you think of that, because your higher self has brought you to this particular video at this time, Scorpio, because it reckons that you're ready to make changes inside of yourself that you weren't perhaps ready to make even a month ago, okay? I've also got 24 other CDs which are from Intensive 2 and 3, which are out of my deeper book, Coming Home, An Eternal Journey. So that's a gift from me for you, Scorpio. Now, to give you an idea of the impact that these CDs are having upon some of my thousands of students worldwide, I want to read to you an email that was sent to me in the last month from one of my students. Dear Keith, now finally at last answers, real answers. Thank you, thank you, thank you. The greatest journey of my life. Your lessons are exciting, challenging and empowering. As you say, I am now in spiritual university, studying consciousness expansion, and you are my loved teacher. And what a teacher! Patient, supportive, encouraging and expert. It's as if you know at what pace I can absorb information. While some goes over my head or I just plain don't hear it, I catch up on the next attempt. I'm being watched over, helped along and encouraged all the way. The meditations are perfectly timed and emotional for me. I can see now, though, that my words fail to fully describe the impact your intensives are having on every level of my life. For me to think that events and circumstances in my life were being shaped by outside influences appears now to be a weird dream. I'll never again see anything as I once did, but the impacts are much deeper and broader than that. The Transformation series is life-changing and stand alone as inspired individual works that will impact on me for the rest of my life. I feel they are so powerful. For my part, I will apply myself 110% to the task. What wonders will Intensive number 3 hold? I'm going to find out. I can't wait to hear you talk about quantum physics and where it fits into metaphysics. The whole series is gold. Not for the last time. Thank you, Keith. Love, Lex. So that's a very heartfelt thank you there from one of my students, and there's heaps, dozens and dozens of testimonials there in the website for you to have a look at, okay? Now also, Scorpio, sometimes I offer what's called a free horoscope number 1. Now, when I've offered this before, I've sometimes had 40 orders in one day, which means that I've got to do 40 horoscope charts in one day and then interpret my findings from what I see there in that chart into a 7-page printout that's sent to you by email. So that's a lot of work for me, Scorpio. So this will be available some days and not available other days. It'll be turned on and off like a faucet. So visit my website and see if it's available. If it is, you've got the choice there to be able to submit your birth details, and then I'll send you that beautiful 7-page printout to help you to understand yourself more and to become more of who you really are. Now, subscribe to my videos because I'm pumping out new videos all the time. I'll probably produce 100 to 150 videos in 2015. And I think that's about all I need to say to you, Scorpio. So if you don't come and visit my website, you've got all of my YouTube videos, 145 of them there, on all aspects of personal and spiritual growth that you can access. And you can access the 12 CDs and download them and take your time in going on further with the job. And if you do go on with the job and download those CDs and submit your birth details and so forth, well, then I look forward to doing your horoscope chart for you and liaising with you as you progress. So it's nice to have this opportunity to talk with you, Scorpio. I wish you well in life in the future, and I thank you for your attentiveness here. Thank you.